Hello everybody, this is Hammer Striker here. In today's This Old Gun, I've got a very old gun. I've got an 83-year-old gun, a German Luger. Please don't forget to check out our website. Go to our affiliates page. You'll find discount codes for things like Mantis Axe and Core belts. Link to that cool little bore light that we use for lighting up the barrels. Use those links. It will often save you money, never will cost you any additional money, and helps the channel. Thank you. This particular Luger was made in 1939, as you can see by the stamping on the chamber right here. And being a German gun, it's very, very well documented on the gun as far as all of the parts have the last two digits of the serial number. So there's the serial number, and then all of the parts, everything, including the firing pin, is numbered. This one happens to be a numbers matching gun as far as all the numbers on the gun itself. And best as I can tell, there was no force matching. And force matching is a concept where they take a part that has the last two digits of a different serial number, let's say 5292, and they use those parts to replace a part that's failed. Best as I can tell by looking at the finish and other characteristics of the parts, there is no force matching, so this is a true numbers matching gun. This gun's been on my list. I've wanted this for a very long time. I found this one, a friend of mine had it, and he had bought it used, and we were able to negotiate a good price on it. I'm never going to get rid of this. This is one of the bucket list guns that I've had for a very long time. This one is not the most valuable of the ones that are out there, but it's also not the least valuable. It kind of comes in the uncommon territory, so there's not a lot of this particular variation, but they're not rare or extremely rare like some variants are. Now, I'm not going to claim to be an expert on these things at all, but I will talk to you about some of the things that I use to identify this. First off, I used a document called the Standard Catalog of Luger. And it's a really, really detailed document. It's a book, basically, hundreds of pages. It starts out with all sorts of history, details about these guns, and then it gets into a flowchart. And the flowchart you can use to identify this. And that flowchart is how I identified this thing. And I'm not going to put any of that book on screen. The book is copyrighted, so I'm not going to violate their copyright. But if you're looking at Lugers or interested in Lugers, see if you can get a copy of that, because that book really is very detailed. But things like the fact that this has a date above the chamber makes a difference. This weird little character right here, that's actually a character. That's not damage. That's a stamping. And they call it the serial number prefix. And that character makes a difference in whether this serial number is one run or not, whether there's stampings on the barrel itself, underside the barrel. So there's a lot that goes into it. The S42 identifies it as a Mauser. The year and some of the other stampings identify it as military issue. So this particular gun was manufactured right around the beginning of World War II, maybe a little before, maybe a little after the very beginning, and it was issued as a military issue gun. It wasn't issued to a specific regiment. If it were, there'd be other stampings that would indicate which group or individual it was issued to. So this would have been just kind of general issue to the military. Even the identification on the safety and whether it has a dot or whether it has wording, that makes a big difference as well, again, in trying to identify the gun. I think this is pronounced Guzzikat or something along those lines. I don't know German well enough to be authoritative that that's the pronunciation. But different stampings in different versions on the safety will indicate different models, as well as the shape and style of this lug on the toggle. That makes a difference too in identifying them. And again, I'm not a German Luger expert that I can say here's exactly how to identify the gun you've got, but you're looking at nuances. I even had to take this apart and look at parts of the firing pin to fully identify the gun. When I was done, I kind of came up with that the finish is in probably good to very good condition, with one exception. It does have a defect. You see that it's kind of a brownish color here, black on the barrel, black here, and then brown. This is called plumbing, turning plum. And right around the years of the manufacture, a couple of years, they had some inaccuracies in the salt bath chemistry. And this gun originally would have been black. The whole thing would have been black and would have roughly matched. But the hardened components didn't take as well as non-hardened components. So you get some changing in color. That is actually considered a defect, and it lowered the value of this gun. To me, since I'm not in it to get rid of it, I'm going to keep it. I'm not in this, I don't have this to make money on. To me, it kind of looks cool. I kind of like the look of it. But I know technically that would be considered a defect. These operate totally differently than any modern firearm in that I grab this and I pull up and back, and that's how you cycle it. And if I put the magazine in it, it will lock back like a modern firearm, but there's no lever or anything I can push to release it. So if I want to release it, I have to pop the magazine out and then grab it and release it. So they work different, and when you look at the back of it, it just looks super, super wide. It actually isn't. It's 1.5 inches when you consider the safety lever. So it looks a lot wider at the back than it actually is, and that may be because a lot of the other parts kind of trim down and become really slim. But these are just cool. These are iconic. These are interesting. This particular one is chambered in 9mm. There were other chamberings for these at different versions and eras, and even specific military regiments and things would have different calibers. Now, I did say this was a numbers matching gun. There's even a serial number on the magazine. If I get this turned the right way and get it where the camera can focus. I don't have matching magazines, and these were issued with 2, and I've only got 1. Now, I can get other magazines. I can either get reproductions or I can buy other used magazines. But the magazines don't match, and then of course when I was choosing it, that affected the value. And I have this holster. It's a leather holster. And if anybody that's seen any movie with the German military and it's seen this holster or the black version of it, it's all leather. And you can see it has a serial number which also does not match the gun. So the magazines and holsters no longer match. And that's not uncommon for regular military issue. You can even see the stamping that it was made in Berlin. With a lot of the military, just like with US or any other military, holsters get swapped around, magazines get swapped around. In the heat of battle, somebody throws somebody else a magazine, and when everything's done, they don't sit there and compare the serial numbers and make sure they got their magazine back. As long as they have the same number or more magazines as when they started, they're good to go. So it's not surprising to me that the holster and the magazine don't match, because this wasn't bought by a collector. This was given to somebody that was using it in battle. And you can see that the magazine would go in here, and then the pistol, presumably with a magazine in it, would go in here. If I had 2 magazines, I'd put the magazine in it. And then there's a clean out tool that goes here. And then close up the holster, and you would do up this little leather strap. This is getting a little bit brittle, so I'm not going to do this up. But this would be the same type of thing you would have seen in any World War II movie or Hogan's Heroes or any of the others. You've seen this holster design. They were often black if you were officers and things like that, and then this more brownish color for regular infantry. They weren't super easy to draw from, but anytime you've actually seen them drawing these things, they usually don't seem to be in a big hurry. And of course, they also had in most cases, they had a rifle. So this was their sidearm, and then they had the rifle. Now this does have an interesting characteristic, and it has a magazine disconnect. So when I was firing this, you'll probably saw that the clips were shorter than usual. It was malfunctioning. Now keep in mind, this is an 83-year-old gun. What I ended up figuring out was happening is that the magazine disconnect was sticking. So I had to pull the magazine out back in again and get it to function again. So these do have a magazine disconnect, and they are a bit problematic if you get an older gun. The other thing I ran into is the sights are very not good. You've got basically a little V-notch at the back, and you've got a very pointy, sharp post at the front with no coloration. This isn't white, this is just a wear on the finish. So from a sights perspective, the sights were very difficult to use. The gun has good mechanical accuracy, despite the fact that this particular one of the things that is a bit worn on it is the barrel. So let me go ahead and lock the toggle back. It'll be easier than trying to hold it. If you look closely, you'll see some pitting on the rifling, but for the most part the rifling is still nice and sharp and solid and clean. It's just that there's a little bit of pitting on the surface. So this bore is not in perfect condition, but it's not in bad condition either. And it did seem to have good mechanical accuracy. I just had a hard time seeing the sights with it. I'm not going to do anything about that for two reasons. One, the sights are all part of the gun. You can't just replace these. They're not dovetail. I'm not just popping in new sights. And number two, it would kind of ruin the character of it to start painting white dots on it. It's not like I'm going to shoot this a lot. I'm not a safe queen type of person, but the closest I'm going to get to a safe queen is probably this thing. I'm not going to go out and shoot hundreds of rounds through this. It's an 83-year-old gun. It's not something that you want to do that with. That Smith & Wesson revolver is another one that probably won't get shot a lot. Talk about the dimensions a little bit. It's not small. You can kind of tell from me holding it. It's 8.5 inches long. It's 5.25 inches tall. And as I mentioned earlier, it's 1.5 inches thick. And it weighs 31 ounces because, of course, it's all metal, except the grips. The grips are wood. And one nice thing about this particular one is the grips are in good shape. There's no cracking, no chips. There are some discolorations from just plain wear, but you'll see the texture's in good shape. There's no splits. And at the base, it's not broken off here at the base or around the screw. And that same is true on the other side. So I found one that had grips that were in really good shape, which was kind of nice. So overall, what I ended up with is a probably good to very good condition gun. That the one thing that would be probably to some would detract from the condition is this plumbing, but I kind of think it looked cool. I kind of like it. In order to demonstrate the trigger, I'm not going to take a risk of damaging this. I've loaded the magazine with inert dummy rounds. These are snap caps. They're designed to protect the firing pin, but they're inert. Put it on fire. Cycle it. So as I pull back on the trigger, the first thing is it kind of looks interesting. It kind of looks like the head of a wrench, kind of a half moon, and you get this little piece that would normally sit up against the trigger guard, kind of acts as a stop as I pull back on it. It's just kind of interesting to see. But as I pull back, there's the take up, and it chose not to fire. I think I've got a problem with the magazine disconnect. Got it on fire. There it goes. So it's a fairly short and a fairly light break. It doesn't have a combat trigger like you would expect. Now, I'm going to probably have a problem with that magazine disconnect acting up again. I do have to take it apart and clean that and probably tune it a little bit. But take up is mostly all the way out. I mean, that would be all the way out, but basically it's the same. But you'll notice it's got a very short travel. And there, that time it actually broke, so the magazine disconnect disconnected. But overall, it's actually a nice trigger for a gun this old. A lot of guns this era had long, heavy triggers, and these actually have quite nice triggers, and an interesting looking trigger at that. Overall, I find these to be really interesting guns. I'll talk about some of the controls on it. I'm not going to take it apart today. It's a little bit technical taking these apart. If there's enough interest in that, I'll do a video, so comment in the video if you're interested in seeing it taken apart. But it's a little more time consuming. It's not as bad as some guns of this era, but it's not as easy as taking apart a Glock. But this is the takedown lever, and then this plate is part of the locking that holds all the components together. You have the magazine release, of course, and it is not ambi. And then these lugs on the toggle are used to get a hold of it to pull it back. That was the last snap cap. But they also act as part of the pivot point for this component. And there's a spring down in here that this all hooks into. So if I pull the magazine out, I can pull back on it, and then notice it kind of like a two-step. So it pulls back, and you'll see that the slide is moving a little bit as it moves back, and then when it comes forward, then it comes down and it locks. So it's a very interesting mechanism. I don't ever see somebody wanting to make a new gun with this type of a design, but in that era, the fact that the speed and the reliability of these was kind of unusual. And also it has a little thing here that you can grip, pull the follower down to make the magazine easier to load. And you can load this like any other magazine, stuffing the rounds in one at a time, but this makes it a little bit easier. And these lugs at the bottom make it easy to get a hold of to pull the magazine out. So when the magazine's in there, it fits up reasonably flush. Of course, you got this little base here that actually probably could be used for hammering and other things, and I'm sure it was. I'm sure it wasn't designed for that, but I'm sure that got used for that. But when you go to pull the magazine out, you release it, you can very quickly pull it out with these little lugs. So it was really designed to be used in extreme conditions. This one also, and this is one of the other characteristics that help identify it, is it does have a lug for a stock. So they actually had stocks that you could put on these at the time and kind of turn it into like a little carbine. And I don't have the stock that goes with it. You also have a lug back here for a strap, and this also would have been part of the stock mounting. So you could both used either way. Overall, just interesting. This is the type of gun that if you're into guns, and I'm not really big into antiques in general, but if you're a gun collector, your collection probably will end up having one of these at some point. And again, that one book, that standard catalog of Luger, is a good one to make sure that what you think you're paying for and what you're actually paying for are the same thing. And like any other gun, you would check the condition of all the components. The only thing I saw wrong with this is that the barrel has some pitting, but it wasn't enough to shut down me getting this. Now, if I were into the multi-$1,000 range, then I'd be a little more picky. But I got this at a fair price, and with what I wanted just to possess a Luger that was in good functional condition, with the exception of this magazine disconnect I got to do something about, I kind of got what I was looking for. Beyond that, if you like our videos, please give us a thumbs up, share, subscribe, click that bell to be notified if you do. Check us out on Facebook, Patreon, Instagram, Twitter, Getter. We're kind of everywhere. And thank you. So it's up with the magazine and the magazine disconnect.